A SEAL lieutenant removed his cap and saluted a comms tech no one had paid attention to all week. The base went silent. Every soldier turned. No one understood what was happening until they heard her name. 6 days earlier, Sergeant Leah Morgan stepped off the dusty transport at Forward Operating Base Tango with a canvas duffel, a headset around her neck, and sand already clinging to her boots. She wasn't loud. She didn't make eye contact. She simply signed the arrival sheet, nodded once to the transport sergeant, and walked toward the equipment sheds. Leah wasn't new to bases like this. The sun was always too hot. The coffee was always weak. And people like her, support crew, tech specialists, non-combat roles, were rarely noticed. She'd been in the Army for 9 years, and this was her 5th overseas rotation. Her record was clean. Her evaluations were perfect. But recognition? That wasn't why she was here. She unpacked her gear in the back corner of the barracks, not far from the satellite arrays. No nameplate on the cot. No introductions. Just a quiet woman in her late 20s with sharp eyes and a steady pace. She began checking the main communication towers that afternoon, logging faults, tightening relays, replacing filters. All of it went unnoticed by the combat units on base. The younger soldiers called her ComTech, not knowing her name. Others just moved past her. She didn't mind. She preferred silence. She listened more than she spoke. And when she did talk, it was short, direct, and technical. By the 3rd day, she'd fixed 3 low-band channels, upgraded the transmission firmware, and corrected a mis-routed encryption line no one had noticed for weeks. She did it all without asking for permission or praise. Her superiors let her be, as long as the systems worked. The base itself was tense. Rumors spread fast that SEAL Team Echo was prepping for a high-risk recon deep past the Western Ridge, an area crawling with IEDs and outdated maps. It wasn't official, but everyone knew. The armory was checking night gear. The medics were prepping extra trauma kits. And the radios? They'd need to be flawless. On the 5th day, Leah stayed late. She was recalibrating the uplink signal for the satellite relay that covered the Echo Team zone. Her hands moved fast, but precisely, like someone who had done this more times than she could count. She adjusted gain values, swapped out a power modulator, and ran the diagnostics twice. When she was satisfied, she packed up and walked back to her cot. No one thanked her. No one even noticed she'd been out there in the wind until nearly midnight. Then came the 6th day. It was early afternoon. The sky was white-hot. A low hum of tension hung in the air. Suddenly, the command center's outer alarm chirped once, soft but sharp. Inside, officers crowded around monitors. Red text blinked across the main screen. SEAL Team Echo had gone dark. No signal. No extraction beacon. No voice comms. All links were dead. Base control tried rerouting the signal, switching backups, resetting relay loops. Nothing worked. The room grew silent, except for the soft clicking of keyboards and the rising anxiety in every breath. Someone muttered, "It's the Western Tower. Signal's gone." No one moved. Then a quiet voice came from the side of the room. "I'll go." Heads turned. Leah was already pulling her field vest over her uniform and grabbing her toolkit. Her voice was calm. Not arrogant. Not loud. Just sure. She didn't wait for clearance. She didn't ask for backup. She just stepped out into the sun and headed for the failing tower, not knowing that someone who had been saved by her once before, was already out there watching. The tower stood half a mile from the edge of the base, alone on a slight rise of sand and rock. It had been hit before, twice in the last year, but repaired and reinforced each time. Still, the desert had a way of wearing down even the strongest equipment. Leah walked toward it with a weight of urgency in her steps. The silence of the base behind her only made the stakes clearer. Every second counted. If Echo Team was out of contact, they were exposed. No support. No updates. No air cover. And no extraction. She knew the clock had already started ticking the moment that red screen appeared. As she approached the relay station, the wind picked up. The desert was unforgiving this time of day, hot, dry, and blinding. She squinted through the dust as she reached the control box. It looked intact from the outside, but she knew better. Power fluctuation? Broken link? Fried circuit? She wouldn't know until she was inside it. She knelt beside the access panel and popped the hatch. The inner systems were a mess. Heat damage. Sand intrusion. One of the main power nodes had fused. No wonder the tower had gone dead. Leah pulled out her compact toolkit and got to work, her fingers moving with precision. She didn't speak. She didn't waste motion. She cut the melted lines, stripped them, rewired the relay path, and began a manual reset on the transmission drive. Back at base, no one knew what was happening. They only knew Echo Team was still missing, and the comms tech had vanished into the sand alone. Officers were debating whether to send a patrol after her. One argued that she wasn't combat trained. Another said they had no one else qualified enough to fix the relay. Meanwhile, Leah was wiping sweat from her eyes and checking voltages with a portable meter. A faint crackling sound came from the relay, then silence again. Still no signal. She frowned. Something else was wrong. She leaned in closer, running diagnostics through the emergency interface, eyes scanning rows of code. Behind her, the wind shifted. She didn't hear the footstep at first, just the wind pressing against her helmet. But something made her stop. Instinct, maybe. She slowly reached toward her sidearm. "It's me," came a voice behind her. Low, calm, and strangely familiar. She turned halfway and saw him. Lieutenant Jack Hale. SEAL Team Echo. Gear dirty. Rifle slung. Bleeding from a gash above his eyebrow. He looked like he'd walked through fire. She stared at him, caught off guard. Last she knew, Echo was unaccounted for. They still were. And yet he was standing here in the open, like a ghost who hadn't realized he was still breathing. "I broke protocol coming here," he said. "Didn't care. Saw your name on the rotation. Figured if anyone could get us out of this mess, it'd be you." Leah didn't respond. She just turned back to the relay and kept working. Hale moved beside her, scanning the perimeter, watching the ridgeline. She could feel his presence behind her, calm, alert, and strangely protective. "Team's about 5 clicks west," he said quietly. "Hiding in an old structure. No comms. No way to call for help. We need this tower." "I know," she said. "I'm almost there." A minute passed. Then another. She reached the final sequence. One last connection. She clipped the main power lead, rerouted the output, and hit the reset. The system blinked twice. Then green. The hum returned. Leah grabbed the handset. "FOB Tango, this is Relay West. Do you copy?" The response came a second later. "Relay West, this is Tango. Signal re-established. SEAL Echo comms reconnected. Great work." Hale exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for an hour. She didn't say anything, just tightened the last bolt, closed the panel, and stood. He looked at her with something deeper than thanks. Respect. And then he reached up, removed his cap, and saluted her. The salute stopped the world for a moment. Leah's heart beat faster than she expected. She had seen plenty of salutes before, commanders saluting commanders, soldiers saluting officers, but this was different. This wasn't protocol or ceremony. It was a gesture filled with gratitude, respect, and something unspoken that echoed louder than any words. Around them, the wind swept through the dusty outpost, stirring up sand and loose papers. Hale's eyes locked with hers, steady and sincere. Behind him, a handful of soldiers gathered, their chatter fading into silence as the meaning of the moment settled on everyone. Leah nodded once, sharp but quiet. "Let's get back," she said. Her voice broke the silence, but didn't shatter the weight of what had just happened. The journey back to base was slow, the sun beginning to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in streaks of orange and purple. Hale walked beside Leah, occasionally glancing at her tools and gear, then up to the fading light. "I owe you," he said finally. "More than you know." Leah didn't answer. She wasn't used to gratitude, at least not like this. Her job was to fix things, radios, systems, signals, things people depended on but rarely saw. The soldiers who fought out there relied on her work, but that reliance was silent, invisible. When they reached the base, news had already spread. Officers whispered about the miracle of the restored comms. The medics checked on Hale and the others. The rest of the SEAL team began to trickle in, tired and dirty, but alive. Leah stayed quiet in the background, packing up her gear again, hands steady despite the adrenaline still rushing in her veins. Later that evening, Hale found her near the equipment shed. The glow from the floodlights cast long shadows across the gravel. "Tell me how you did it," he said, his voice low. "I want to make sure we never lose contact like that again." Leah hesitated, then began to explain. She talked about the relay station, the heat damage, the sand that had infiltrated the circuits, how she had rewired the power node, bypassed the damaged components, and performed a manual reset. She described the diagnostics she ran and the way the system's hum returned, signaling the link was alive. Hale listened, nodding, clearly impressed. "Most people would have waited for backup," he said. "You didn't. Why?" Leah looked away for a moment, then back at him. "Because when you're out there, every second matters. Waiting isn't an option. Someone has to act." Her words hung in the air like a quiet challenge. Over the next few days, the base slowly returned to routine, but something had changed. Leah was no longer just a comms tech. The soldiers she passed nodded with new respect. Officers asked for her input on system maintenance. Even the quiet mechanics in the back began to look her way. One afternoon, as she was recalibrating a satellite link, a junior officer approached her. "You saved more than just radios," he said. "You saved lives. The entire Echo team." Leah smiled faintly. "I just fixed the signal." But deep down, she knew it was more than that. That night, as the camp settled under a blanket of stars, Leah sat alone outside the barracks, the sounds of the base quieting around her. She pulled a small photo from her pocket, a faded picture of a younger Jack Hale, surrounded by his team during training. They were smiling, unaware of the dangers ahead. Her phone buzzed softly. A message from Hale appeared on the screen. "We owe you everything. Thank you." Leah put the photo away and looked up at the stars. Somewhere out there, her work had made the difference between life and death. And though no medals would be pinned on her chest, no headlines would be written, she felt the weight of that truth quietly settling inside her. She was more than the quiet tech in the corner. She was a lifeline. And in this war, that was enough. The days after the rescue blurred together, but for Leah, every moment felt charged with a new kind of purpose. The base buzzed with a quiet energy. Soldiers whispering about the comm-tech who saved the SEALs, officers giving her nods of approval she had never known before. Yet, Leah remained focused on the work. There was always another problem waiting, another wire to fix, another system to save. One morning, as she checked the main communication hub, a message came through on her secure radio. It wasn't for the usual maintenance team. It was from Command, direct orders. They needed her expertise on a new operation that would push the limits of their communication technology in hostile territory. The mission was top secret. It was dangerous. But they trusted her. Leah felt the weight of that trust settle like a stone in her stomach. She had never been one for the spotlight, but now it was clear she couldn't hide behind the shadows anymore. This was her chance to step into the front line, not with a weapon, but with her skills. The next days were a whirlwind of preparation. She studied new encryption protocols, tested portable signal boosters, and learned how to deploy mobile comms units under fire. Her hands moved with confidence, but her mind was racing. This was not just about fixing radios anymore. This was about survival, hers and the team's. Her thoughts often drifted to Jack Hale and the SEALs. They had trusted her when it counted most, and now it was her turn to prove that trust was not misplaced. She wasn't just a technician anymore. She was a lifeline, a critical piece in a deadly puzzle. On the eve of the mission, Leah stood by the edge of the base, staring at the horizon where darkness would soon fall. The wind tugged at her uniform, whispering promises of challenges ahead. She clenched her jaw and looked down at her gear, packed and ready. There was no turning back. When dawn broke, the convoy rolled out under the cover of early light. Leah sat between the communications van and the armored personnel carrier, her fingers tapping nervously on her toolkit. Every mile closer to the mission zone tightened the knot in her chest. The terrain was unforgiving, rocky outcrops, sparse vegetation, and an ever-present threat of ambush. The team moved cautiously, every soldier alert. Leah's role was clear: keep the lines open no matter what. Hours into the mission, the unthinkable happened. An explosion rocked the rear of the convoy. An IED. The ground shook beneath them, throwing dust and debris into the air. The armored van shuddered, but stayed upright. Soldiers scrambled to assess the damage and tend to the wounded. Leah's radio went dead. Panic flashed across the faces of the team. No comms meant no support, no extraction, no backup. Hale's voice crackled through on an emergency channel, urgent and clipped. "Leah, status?" She frantically flipped switches, ran diagnostics, and rewired circuits under the shaking vehicle. Her hands moved with a desperate speed, but the radio stayed silent. Behind her, footsteps approached. Hale appeared, grim but steady. "We're pinned down," he said. "We need that radio working. Lives depend on it." Leah didn't look up. "I'm trying." Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. Finally, the crackle of static broke through. A voice answered, command confirming their position and sending reinforcements. Relief flooded the convoy. Hale's eyes met Leah's, filled with gratitude and something deeper, trust renewed in the woman who refused to let them fall silent. The rest of the mission was a blur of tension, quick decisions, and silent prayers. But thanks to Leah, the team held the line and made it back. The base greeted them with quiet cheers and a respect that needed no words. Later that night, Leah sat alone, exhaustion heavy in her bones. Her phone buzzed again, another message from Hale. Asterisk, "You're not just fixing gear. You're saving lives. Don't ever forget that." Asterisk. She smiled faintly, staring at the stars once more. The war was far from over, but she had found her place in it. No longer invisible, no longer just a background player. Leah Morgan was a guardian of the signal, and in this fight, that meant everything. Leah's reputation grew quietly but steadily. Soldiers, who once barely glanced her way, now sought her out with questions and respect. She had become the unseen backbone of every mission, the one who ensured voices could be heard, commands relayed, and lives saved through a simple yet vital connection: communication. But the war had a way of testing even the strongest. A week after the convoy incident, a new challenge arrived. One more dangerous, more personal. Intelligence warned of a large insurgent group moving toward their sector, planning to cut off the base's supply lines and communications. The threat was real, and the base was on high alert. Command called a meeting. Officers strategized over maps, radios buzzing with static and updates. Leah sat quietly listening. Then the unexpected happened. She was pulled aside and handed a critical task. "You're going out with the advance team," the operations officer said. "We need you to set up a forward comms post deep behind enemy lines. Without reliable comms, this mission fails." Leah felt a rush of adrenaline and fear. Forward deployment was never part of her job description. But she nodded. This was her moment. No more hiding in the shadows. She spent hours preparing, packing every tool she might need, double-checking encryption keys, signal boosters, and backup batteries. The gravity of the mission pressed on her chest, but she pushed the doubts aside. She was ready. The next day, under cover of pre-dawn darkness, Leah moved out with the team. The landscape was stark and unforgiving, every step measured and cautious. The closer they got to the enemy's expected position, the thicker the tension grew. The soldiers whispered prayers, clutched weapons tighter, and watched every shadow. Leah focused on her equipment, setting up a mobile comm station in a rocky outcrop. She calibrated frequencies, adjusted antennas, and ran tests. The signal was weak, but with patience and skill, it began to stabilize. Hours later, the unexpected happened. Enemy patrols discovered their position. Gunfire erupted in bursts, echoes bouncing through the canyon walls. The team scrambled for cover. Leah ducked behind a boulder, heart pounding, fingers trembling as she fought to keep the radios alive. A bullet struck the edge of her station, sparks flying. She froze for a split second, then forced herself to keep working. Without comms, they were blind and doomed. Suddenly, Hale's voice cut through the chaos. "Leah, status? We're moving to support. Hold tight." Leah's breath hitched. "Holding," she whispered. "Signal stable. Just keep them off me." Minutes dragged like hours. The firefight raged around her, but Leah's hands never stopped. She patched wires, rerouted power, and boosted signals with desperate determination. Then a shout from the team. Contact neutralized. The battle quieted, but the danger was far from over. Leah looked around, spotting Hale limping toward her, sweat and dirt smeared across his face. "You saved us again," he said, voice rough but grateful. "Can you keep this up?" Leah nodded, exhausted but resolute. "As long as it takes." The mission continued for days. Leah set up relay points, moved with the teams, and kept the lifeline alive. Each success was a silent victory, each crackling voice on the radio a thread pulling them closer to safety. Back at base, her story spread. No longer was she just the quiet tech fixing radios. Leah Morgan had become a symbol, proof that courage came in many forms, and that heroism wasn't always about weapons or glory. One evening, as the sun dipped low, Leah received a message from Hale. "You're more than our comms tech. You're the heart of this team. Stay safe." She stared at the screen, the weight of his words settling deep inside. This war was still raging, but Leah had found something stronger than fear or doubt. She had found her place, and a bond that no distance or danger could break. The sun had barely risen when the call came through. A high-priority mission, urgent and dangerous. Intelligence had spotted a key insurgent leader moving through the mountains. The SEAL team was tasked with capturing him, but this time the operation depended even more heavily on flawless communication, the kind only Leah could guarantee. She didn't hesitate. Packing her gear with practiced hands, she joined the team briefing. Hale gave her a nod that held both trust and an unspoken warning. This mission would push everyone to their limits. The terrain was brutal, steep cliffs, narrow passes, and hidden enemy positions. As the team moved forward, Leah set up her mobile comms units, linking each relay to the next, creating a lifeline of signals stretching miles across rocky ground. But the enemy was waiting. Suddenly, gunfire erupted. Ambushed from the high ground, the team scattered for cover. Leah dove behind a boulder, heart pounding, but her fingers worked without hesitation. She scrambled to restore the broken links, rerouting signals through backup channels, boosting power where it faltered. "Leah, status?" Hale's voice crackled urgently. "Signals weak, but holding." "Keep moving to the extraction point," she replied. The firefight intensified. Bullets whizzed past. Explosions echoed in the canyons. Yet Leah stayed calm, steadying her breath as she patched wires and adjusted frequencies. Minutes later, a critical relay failed. Leah's heart skipped. Without it, the team would be cut off. She tore open the panel, heat rising as she fought against the clock and the elements. Sand crept inside, circuits fried from the intense sun. Sweat dripped from her brow, blurring her vision, but she refused to stop. With a final spark, the system roared back to life. Relay restored. Signal stable, she whispered, almost in disbelief. Behind her, Hale's voice came through clearer than before. You did it. We're moving out. The team regrouped and pushed forward. Leah's comms kept them connected, guiding air support, coordinating medical evac, and sharing intel that saved lives. After hours of relentless movement, the team cornered the insurgent leader. The capture was swift, but not without cost. Hale was wounded, a bullet grazing his shoulder. Leah rushed to his side, her hand steady as she applied a field dressing. Can't lose you, she said softly. He smiled weakly. You're my good luck charm. Back at base, the atmosphere was different. The victory was celebrated quietly, too much was lost, and the war continued. But Leah felt a shift inside herself. She was no longer just the comms tech. She was a soldier, a vital part of the team's heartbeat. That night, in the dim glow of the communications tent, Leah stared at the blinking monitors. Messages flowed in, reports, requests, updates, all routed through her hands. Her phone buzzed again. A simple text from Hale. Asterisk, we wouldn't make it without you. Asterisk. She smiled, feeling the weight of her journey. From the unnoticed technician fixing radios in silence to the woman who kept a team alive in the fiercest battles. Leah knew the road ahead would be long and hard. But now, she faced it with quiet confidence. In the chaos of war, she was the calm, the connection, the lifeline. And that made all the difference. The days stretched into weeks, and Leah found herself immersed deeper in the heart of the operation. The base was no longer a safe haven, but a staging ground for a series of increasingly perilous missions. Each one demanded flawless communication, and each time, Leah delivered. The radios, satellites, and relay stations were her battlefield, and every successful transmission was a victory. But the war was wearing on everyone. Fatigue crept in like a slow poison. Soldiers moved through the motions, faces etched with exhaustion and worry. Leah felt it too, the pressure to perform, to keep everyone connected, alive, and informed. One late afternoon, as the sun dipped low, an urgent alert flashed across Leah's monitor. A distress signal from Echo Team. The message was fragmented, broken by interference, but the desperation was clear. They were pinned down in hostile territory, surrounded, and running low on supplies. Leah's heart pounded. This was the moment she had trained for, feared, and hoped never to face. Without hesitation, she grabbed her gear and headed to the command center. Officers scrambled to organize a rescue. Plans shifted, coordinates changed, and the tension in the room thickened. Leah's hands flew over the console, patching signals, amplifying frequencies, clearing static. Every second mattered. Leah, can you maintain a stable link? Hale's voice crackled through the comms. His tone was steady, but Leah sensed the strain beneath it. I'm doing everything I can, she replied. Hold on. The relay tower was miles away, exposed to enemy fire. Leah volunteered to move out and fix it herself. The base hesitated. The risk was high, but there was no other option. Under cover of darkness, Leah set off with a small security team. The journey was tense. Every rustle in the brush, every distant sound could be an ambush. She kept her focus sharp, gear in hand, ready to restore the vital link. When they reached the tower, the damage was worse than she feared. Explosions had shredded cables and fried circuits. Enemy patrols were nearby, and time was running out. Leah moved with quiet urgency, working quickly despite the shadows pressing in. Her fingers were steady as she rewired, rerouted, and repaired. The radio hummed faintly but wouldn't hold. Suddenly, footsteps approached. Leah barely had time to duck behind a panel as enemy soldiers closed in. The team engaged silently, holding the line long enough for her to finish. With a final connection, the system sparked alive. A clear signal burst through the static. Leah grabbed the handset. "Echo Team, this is Relay West. We're back online. Help is on the way." A collective breath seemed to release across the comms. Minutes later, air support arrived, and the rescue mission swung into motion. Leah stayed on the line, coordinating medevac and guiding the team out of danger. When she finally returned to base, exhaustion weighed heavily on her. Hale was waiting, leaning against the wall, a faint smile on his lips. "You did more than fix the radio," he said. "You saved us." Leah shook her head, tired but proud. "I just did my job." But deep down, she knew it was more than that. She had become the lifeline between life and death, the invisible force holding the team together. That night, as stars twinkled overhead, Leah sat alone, feeling the quiet strength she had found within herself. The war was far from over, but she was ready not just to fix machines, but to fight alongside those who depended on her. And in that readiness, she found something she hadn't expected, a profound sense of belonging. The war had changed Leah in ways she never imagined. She was no longer the quiet technician tucked away in a corner. She was a vital thread in the fabric of the mission. Every call she connected, every signal she restored, meant another chance at survival. But as the conflict dragged on, the weight of responsibility grew heavier. One evening, the base received intel of a coordinated enemy attack plan for dawn. The insurgents aimed to sever the communication lines and cripple the base's defenses. Command scrambled to prepare, but Leah knew the real battle would be fought over the airwaves. She spent the night reinforcing the comms network, running diagnostics, recalibrating frequencies, and setting up emergency backup systems. Her fingers danced over the consoles, fatigue forgotten in the face of urgency. When the first shots rang out at dawn, the base plunged into chaos. Explosions rocked the perimeter, alarms blared, and soldiers scrambled to their positions. Leah stayed rooted to her station, eyes glued to the monitors. The enemy had succeeded in their first strike. The main relay tower was down. Communication lines flickered and died. Panic threatened to spread, but Leah's training kicked in. She activated the backup relay, switching to manual control, bypassing the damaged systems. The radio hissed with static. Then a faint voice broke through. Hale's voice, steady despite the chaos. "Leah, we're pinned down near Charlie Sector. We need support." She focused all her energy on keeping the line alive, weaving through interference, fighting against fading signals. The connection was fragile, but it held. Minutes felt like hours as Leah coordinated air support, guided reinforcements, and patched through medical teams. Her voice was calm, a beacon in the storm. Suddenly, the feed went silent. Leah's heart dropped. She frantically worked the controls, but the connection was lost. She refused to accept defeat. With grim determination, Leah grabbed her gear and joined a quick response team to repair the main relay tower under fire. The journey was perilous. Bullets whipped past, explosions lit the sky, and the ground trembled beneath their feet. Reaching the tower, Leah got to work immediately, her hands steady despite the chaos. Enemy forces closed in, but the security team held them back, buying her precious time. With a final deliberate connection, the tower sparked back to life. The radio burst with renewed strength. Voices returned, shouts of relief, commands, and hope. Leah's breath hitched as Hale's voice came through clear and strong. "We're moving out. Thanks to you." The battle raged on, but the lifeline Leah fought so hard to maintain was unbroken. When the smoke finally cleared, the base stood firm. That night, exhausted and bruised, Leah sat outside under a sky thick with stars. Hale joined her, his arm in a sling, but his smile warm. "You did more than fix the gear," he said quietly. "You held us together when everything else was falling apart." Leah looked up, the weight of the war and her journey settling around her like a cloak. "I just answered the call." He shook his head. "No. You answered ours. You're part of this team, part of this family." For the first time, Leah felt the full truth of those words. She wasn't just fixing comms equipment. She was a guardian, a protector, a silent hero whose courage was measured not in bullets fired, but in lives saved. The war would continue, and so would the challenges. But Leah was ready. With every signal sent and every connection restored, she would keep fighting, not just for herself, but for the soldiers who depended on her. Because in this war, sometimes the strongest weapon was a voice heard across the silence.